Hello everyone, my name is John Sierra and I am a Tolkien scholar, and I'm here to answer your questions about Tolkien's work. The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, The Silmarillion, all the other books, or even about the man himself, because we do get questions about the man himself. And thank you for everybody that has been helping the YouTube channel grow. If you know anybody that might be interested, please pass the word along. Hit the thumbs up, subscribe, make sure you have the bell turned on. It's all very important to help the channel grow. This is a second channel for me, but it is not a monetized channel, at least not as of yet. We're hoping to get there. Anyway, if you want one of your questions asked, you can ask in a comment if you wish, but really what you want to do is go look at the description, and there is a link to my Quora account. Quora is a really great site where you can ask and answer questions. Now, if you don't have a Quora account, don't worry. You can sign in with a Google account, you can sign in with a Facebook account, or if you don't have either of those, it's very easy to make an account and just tag me in your question, and I will answer it as best I can, and I will pick my favorites from the week to feature in a video. So, we have 15 questions from the past week here, and we're going to start off with this one. Now, this is one of my favorite subjects to do with the Silmarillion because it has to do with Feanor and Fingolfin. And this was asked by, I still don't know how to say his name, I think it's How Santos. And he asks, why did Feanor betray Fingolfin? I don't think it's exactly correct to say that Feanor necessarily betrayed Fingolfin, because that would suggest that they were friends or that they were close or the allies, and then suddenly they weren't. I think Feanor just never liked Fingolfin. He doesn't like anything about him because his mere existence is an insult to Feanor. They were never really allies or friends, but for Fingolfin's part, he tried his best. He tried to be good to Feanor, he tried to be close to him, but we have to to understand where it all went wrong and why it was all wrong from the get-go, we have to delve into Feanor's mind a little bit. So Feanor loved his mother, Miriel, quite a bit. And she died when he was very young. She laid down her life and abandoned her body, which is something that any elf can do. Elves don't really die, but what happened is she went to the halls of Mandos. And that's still on the same continent as Valinor, but it's a place that you can go there, but you can't come out without permission from Mandos directly. So Mandos, who's the Valar that is in charge of the dead, he's the Doomkeeper, he goes to Miriel and says, what are you doing here, basically? You shouldn't be here. You have every right to leave. You could go. You could walk right out. And she said she's tired. She doesn't want to live. Now, it was said that she used a great deal of energy actually birthing Feanor, and I believe it was something along the lines of the energy that she would use to birth 4 children went into him. And she was tired, and she wanted to rest. Now, the issue here was Feanor's father, Finwë. Finwë was out one wife, right? And he was actually really humiliated and embarrassed by this. He was the only adult male Noldor in Valinor that did not have a wife because she wasn't present. He technically had a wife, but her body was there, still, motionless, not breathing, right? While her spirit, what we call the Fëanor, was in Mandos. So for all intents and purposes, she may as well be dead, right? And he wished to remarry. If she wasn't coming back, he's like, well, then I get to marry somebody else, right? Now, generally speaking, elves do not remarry. They don't even have a concept of divorce, and they don't really die, in the sense, they just go home. They go to Mandos. So the fact that she was there in the halls of Mandos and being told that she could leave at any time she wishes to and go, and return to living, but that she didn't want to, it kind of created a unique situation, and the Valar amended the rules and stated that if your wife, or spouse as they may be, dies, goes to the halls of Mandos, and is found to be honorable and can return, but chooses not to, and has no desire to return, then and your spouse has the desire to remarry, then they may. It's a unique situation, right? So Finwë got remarried. He married Indis. Now, that's where the issue is. So Indis had 4 children with Finwë. There was Findus, Fingolfin, Arime, and Finarfin. Now, the existence of Fingolfin, and all of those others that I mentioned as well, created I guess you would say it's a slight issue of ascension with the High King of the Noldor, but not really, because it's not like Finwë was expected to abdicate or to die anytime soon. They are elves, right? But if we think of that, the whole concept of the High King, Feanor, being Finwë's oldest son, would be the next High King. But now we have somebody, Fingolfin, who is the eldest son with his current wife. It's sort of a weird situation, but that's not really what Feanor was angry about. He loved his mother greatly, and he hated the fact that his father remarried. He didn't understand it. He didn't agree with it. He wanted nothing to do with Indis or her children. He resented that. And he particularly hated Fingolfin. He threatened him with a sword at one point, and part of it was his own feelings, but also Melkor had something to do with this. Melkor was there speaking his poison words to Feanor, trying to convince Feanor that Fingolfin is going to usurp him, not just his place as, the prince, but as Finwë's son. He's going to be replaced. Fingolfin tried, when he was being threatened by a sword, he said, "We are half brothers by blood, full brothers by heart." He tried to extend that olive branch, didn't really work out. So they weren't exactly enemies in the strictest sense. They weren't outright trying to kill each other, except for that one time. And that was really just Feanor threatening Fingolfin. But Fingolfin did not trust Feanor. He was wise to not trust Feanor. But he traveled to Middle-earth across the Helcarax specifically to keep an eye on Feanor, because he felt that the Noldor were not exactly in good hands with his half-brother. So he wanted to keep an eye on things. He was going there basically to try to help the Noldor, just in case Feanor was insane. And we know that he kind of was. Their line did eventually sort of repair. Fingolfin's son was Fingon, and he became good friends with Feanor's son Maethros, and even rescued Maethros when Maethros was captured by Melkor, who is now called Morgoth. And there was such gratitude there that Fingolfin relinquished his claim to the kingship, which actually made Fingolfin the king. So, good question. Okay, so the next question was asked by Alice Stone, who asks, "What is the most surprising thing about Tolkien's personal life that you've discovered during your research?" For me, it would be that though we know that he didn't like machines, right? We know he didn't like machines, he didn't like technology, but the lengths that he took it to are actually comical. And I'm going to tell a quick story here. Tolkien found himself in need of a family car. He got a car, and he nicknamed it Joe, because the first 2 letters on the license plate, the number plate they call it in England, was J-O, so it's Joe, Not very imaginative, I know, but he was putting in his imagination into other things. He also would derisively refer to the car as the machine, right? The first time that Tolkien took his family out in the car to go on a trip and visit some relatives, the car actually suffered Joe got hurt. Joe suffered great damage due to Tolkien's poor driving, which was said to be more daring than it was skillful. He completely disregarded traffic. He was said to have been yelling, "If I charge, they will scatter." So the ordeal of being driven by Tolkien was so severe that Edith Tolkien, his wife, refused to get into the car for a long time. She wanted nothing to do with the car after that whole mess. She was not about to let her husband drive her anywhere. Now, if we examine what we know about Tolkien's personality, his philosophy, and his sense of humor, we can kind of see that he was doing this on purpose, right? He didn't want to drive. He didn't like cars. He felt that they allowed you to travel too quick and that you would not enjoy the scenery, the landscape, your own backyard. It would just go by so quickly. And also he didn't like the inherent pollution or the unsightly roads that were being put up. So he didn't like any of it, and it was almost sort of like a weaponized incompetence, as someone said in a Quora comment. So, it's almost like I will do such a terrible job, and I will terrify everybody that's in the car, and they will not want me to drive them anywhere, and I will not have to drive anymore. So, obviously he did have to drive after that, and he even got a second car. He had named it Joe 2, but it got him off the hook for at least a couple of months. So next question, and this one was asked by the Oski Boski. Could Sauron have defeated any lesser Valar in his prime? No, absolutely not. Not in combat, at least. The differential between the powers, which the elves called the Valar, and the beautiful, which the elves called the Maiar, that's what Sauron was, is great. It's not like the weakest Valar is not slightly more powerful than the strongest Maiar. So, while Sauron was one of the more powerful Maiar, his power as it is magic, seduction, deception, song, craftsmanship, invention. He's not really great at combat, and I'm going to skip this song on the playlist here because it has lyrics and that's throwing me off. So he's not really great at combat. We've seen it time and time again. He can be terrible on the field of battle, but a lot of times he winds up just losing because he only tends to fight when he's desperate. Huan, the Hound of Valinor, beat him handily, and Huan, the very marvelous, is a dog. Not a Maiar, as you might think. Tolkien initially intended Huan to be considered a Maiar, but changed his mind later on. He's just a very special dog. Sauron would not fight the Valar. There's every indication that he was actually quite afraid of them in general. After the War of Wrath, he tried to surrender to Eanwa, who is also a Maiar, and he's the herald of Manwë after the war, and Manwë told him, no, it doesn't work like that. You have to go to Valinor and surrender to Manwë directly. And Sauron did not do that. Instead, he tried to make himself look good. He tried to appear fair to the Valar by going around doing good deeds, performing good works, healing the land. And after a while, he sensed this wasn't working. He still didn't go to Valinor and surrender to Manwë. He was afraid. He was afraid of Manwë. He just kind of figured, or rationalized, that the Valar were not watching. They didn't care about Middle-earth anymore, and he could do whatever he wanted to, and that's how he slipped back into evil. Also, I just want to address the fact that you said lesser Valar. There really aren't lesser Valar. There are some, like, that are like Sauron in the way that their powers aren't really related to combat, but they would still defeat him through their own talents. Okay. All right, next question. This was submitted by Richard Miller, and he asks, how did Galadriel resist the One Ring? So Galadriel's choice was incredibly tempting here because Frodo is basically coming up to her with the ring and saying, if you ask for it, I'll give it to you. And she is like, I kind of want it. And she decided not to. And you have to kind of examine what's really going on here. On the one hand, if Frodo succeeds and destroys the One Ring, and this is very unlikely to happen, right? Like, she's not thinking this is going to happen. She's thinking probably he's going to fail. But let's say he does succeed, and Galadriel feared, and rightfully so, that if the One Ring is destroyed, her own ring would lose its power. It would no longer have any magic. In her realm, Lothlorien would no longer be afforded that protection. Now, without Sauron, the world in general becomes a much safer place. that there are lesser evils, there are petty evils, there are mean evils, and Lorien would no longer be so special. It wouldn't be the fair realm that she envisioned when she came to Middle-earth across the Helcarax. So it would wind up fading, her realm, basically. It would lose its importance, it would lose its potency, it wouldn't be as safe. Now, let's say Frodo fails, right? Sauron gets the ring, and then she can no longer use her ring. She has to take it off, otherwise she opens herself to the corruption of the One Ring. Even though the three rings are kind of different, they weren't created with any evil intent, Sauron never laid a finger on them, they were still bound to the One Ring, because it's one ring to rule them all, not one ring to rule everything except those three. So she would be forced to take it off, and then it's sort of the same thing, right? And now she also has to deal with Sauron's forces that would want to invade Lorien, so it would actually be even worse. So either way, she's kind of like boned, right? And then Galadriel's thinking, I could take a third option, right? I could take a third option. If I had the One Ring, I could use it. I could overthrow Sauron, and she is one of the people who could do that. You know, when Boromir spoke of doing it, everybody told him, no, you don't have that ability. But Galadriel knows that she does have that ability. She can wield the One Ring, and she can overthrow Sauron with it. And she knows, just like Gandalf knew, that she would become the Dark Mistress. You know, she would be the next in line to rule Middle-earth with an iron fist. So the only way that she could keep her fair realm is by becoming evil, and she had to reject this and prove that she would not go to any length to keep her fair realm in Middle-earth, which actually is what gets her back into the good graces of the Valar and why she's allowed to pass to the west. She was an exile, and most of the Noldorian exiles were forgiven at the end of the War of Wrath, but there were a few specific names that were not forgiven, and Galadriel was one of them. She was considered sort of an agitator, right? So Galadriel sort of proved everybody wrong here, you know. She knew that she could become like Sauron was, and she knew that resisting this temptation was the only way that she would ever be able to return to the Undying Lands. And she didn't really want to return to the Undying Lands, but she knew it was time, right? Even if Lorien persisted, if she had the One Ring and she kept her fair realm, eventually she herself would fade. So, you know, she was wise, and she knew that she must put her hope into Frodo and pass into the West. Good question, though. Okay, and this is another really good question. This one was submitted anonymously. And this person asks, if Morgoth came back and Sauron had the One Ring, would Morgoth want the ring? Would Sauron give it up to him if he wanted it? So I think Morgoth would think the One Ring, he would look at the One Ring and he would say, that's cute, I like that, you know. But he wouldn't want to take it for himself, because he's not a doer. You know, he sits and he lets Sauron and the Balrogs and everybody do things for him. Sauron's the master of the ring. He would want Sauron to make use of it. Morgoth's ring was Arda, the planet itself, and that's what he put his power into. Sauron did that to a much smaller scale. He did it to a ring instead of a planet, but I think that Morgoth would appreciate the magic, and he would appreciate the application of the One Ring. I think that he would, you know, and I think if he came back and Sauron didn't have the One Ring, he would recover it, and then he would hand it to Sauron with a recrimination, don't lose it again. And he would say, let's start churning out some ring wraiths. Let's make some more rings. Let's capture some people, make them wear the rings and turn them into wraiths. Let's get this going. Let's put the band back together. And then Sauron would do this, and Morgoth would sit in his throne and watch the world burn, so to speak. So that's what I think would happen. I think Morgoth would appreciate the One Ring, but he wouldn't want to keep it for himself. Okay, so next question was asked by... this is an anonymous one. In The Lord of the Rings, why didn't other Gondorian cities within the Kingdom of Gondor come to Minas Tirith's defense when with their own armies or garrisons during the War of the Ring? Was Minas Tirith the only free city left? So I guess like you could come to that conclusion if you watch the films, because it seems like it really was just Minas Tirith. They didn't show or really speak of other cities except for Osgiliath, which had been taken a while ago and was... Osgiliath actually used to be the capital of Gondor, and it fell, and everybody sort of fled back to Minas Tirith, which was more of a fortress. So, but here's the thing. In the book, they did do exactly what you were talking about, and that's actually what the beacons of Gondor were for. Now, while it is true that the beacons were said to go as far north as the border with Rohan, and in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, they were the signal for Rohan that, to come to Gondor's aid. But the real purpose in the book of the Beacons of Gondor was actually to alert the rest of Gondor to do exactly what you were talking about, to send their armies and their garrisons to Minas Tirith to aid in its defense. When Pippin and Gandalf arrived in Gondor, the beacons were already lit, and Gandalf explained to Pippin, what they were and what their purpose was for. And over the next few days in Minas Tirith, Pippin watched as all sorts of hosts came from all over Gondor, and he got to see all these important characters come in, like Prince Imrahil, from various parts and the other cities, to call for Rohan. Rohan was actually already aware, because they knew through Gandalf that Gondor was in need of aid. But the official request for aid was they sent this guy Hirgon, with a ceremonial arrow painted red, and he brought it to Theoden and showed it to him, and that was actually the signal to aid Rohan, while the beacons were more for, everybody in Gondor to get to Minas Tirith. Okay. Next question was asked by McKinnon? It's just one name, McKinnon. McKinnon asks, what if Arvedui of Arthedain became the king of Gondor? So I don't think he would be recognized as the king under any circumstance, unless it was like a violent coup, which would lead to a revolution and likely the destruction of Gondor. We think of Aragorn, Aragorn the second Elessar, when we think of the king of Gondor, but Aragorn's claim to the throne was actually kind of tenuous from a strictly bloodline and standpoint and a political standpoint. The reason that Aragorn was able to become king was because he actually spent a lot of time fulfilling prophecies. And, of course, Denethor died. That was also another big part of it, because Denethor really didn't see Aragorn as somebody who should be king. So, and you have to understand also that Aragorn was not just the king of Gondor. He was the king of a united kingdom of Gondor and Arnor, which is a rather large portion of Middle-earth. And part of his claim is that he's Isildur's heir, right? But that would make him king of Arnor, not Gondor, because that's what Isildur was. Isildur was the king of Arnor, and his brother Anarion was the king of Gondor. Now we know that, Anarion was killed at Barad-dûr, but that's sort of beside the point. Now, through a chance of inbreeding in the line, because one of Isildur's heirs married one of Anarion's heirs, and we see that that's where we get Aragorn from, right? Not as directly as that, but if you look into the genealogy of it, you'll see that he's descended from both lines, through his father and through his mother. So he does actually fulfill that criteria. Now, Denethor didn't know this. His claim is valid in that sense, but it's difficult to really prove that. Which is why, instead of coming to Gondor as a young man, when he was 20, for example, and setting himself up as the king and making his claim, he spent many long years working at it, fulfilling prophecies and making sure that the time was right. So if you look at Arvedui was in a similar position, but this was before the intermarriage between the lines of Isildur and Anarion. And he'd have a very weak claim. because of that. If he tried to claim to be the king of Gondor rather than what the king of Arnor had become, the chieftain of the Dunedain, the stewardship would have just rejected it. They would have said, no, you're not the guy. So the only way that Arvedui would have become king of Gondor is through force, right? He would have had to stage a coup and force his way to the throne. And what we know about the people of Gondor, they would not put up with that. There would be infighting, there would be a civil war, and guess who's going to take advantage of that? Sauron. So, yeah, it wouldn't have ended well. Okay, next question, and this is from the Oski Boski again, and he asks, was Morgoth like an older brother to Sauron? Would he protect him against the Valar if he was caught or get in trouble because of the children of Iluvatar? No, Morgoth and Sauron's relationship is real simple, master-servant. That's all it is. That's all it's ever been. That's all it ever will be, right? Morgoth didn't have a lot of willing servants. He had slaves, he had thralls, and then he had a few willing servants like the Balrogs and Sauron. Sauron was his most enthusiastic supporter, but I don't think that means that Morgoth had any affection for him. Morgoth and Sauron had very different philosophies. Sauron's goal was order. He wanted perfect order. He wanted to bring everything to heel and be in control. He wanted to be able to micromanage everything in Middle-earth. Morgoth, on the other hand, is sort of the opposite of that. He's evil just for the sake of being evil. He's spiteful, he's destructive, he's chaotic. He doesn't want order, he wants mayhem, he wants chaos. Now, you might question, why does Sauron support Morgoth at all then? If he's like that, why would he turn against the Valar and join Morgoth if Morgoth's not all about order? And I think it's just because he's a means to an end. I think he feels that Morgoth can tear everything down and that Sauron will get to rebuild everything in his own image. They were using each other. And they knew that they were using each other. There was no, deception involved, I don't think. If Morgoth tried to protect Sauron in any way, it would be only because he doesn't want to lose a useful servant, though if Sauron was in such danger, maybe Morgoth might not think of him as so useful anymore. Luthien knew this, and I'm going to read you a passage from the Silmarillion. But no wizardry nor spell, neither fang nor venom nor devil's art, nor beast strength could overthrow Huan of Valinor. And he took his foe by the throat and pinned him down. Then Sauron shifted state. Yeah, let's try that again. I am sorry. Let's try that again. I'm going to take that from the top. But no wizardry nor spell, neither fang nor venom, nor devil's art, nor beast strength could overthrow Huan of Valinor. And he took his foe by the throat and pinned him down. Then Sauron shifted shape, from wolf to serpent, then from monster to his own accustomed form, but he could not elude the grip of Huan without forsaking his body utterly. Ere his foul spirit left its dark house, Luthien came to him, and she said he could be stripped of his raiment of flesh, and his ghost be sent quaking back to Morgoth. And she said, there, everlastingly thy naked self shall endure the torment of his scorn, pierced by his eyes, unless thou yield to me the mastery of thy tower. Then Sauron yielded himself, and Luthien took the mastery of the isle and all that was there, and Huan released him. And immediately he took the form of a vampire, great and dark as a dark cloud across the moon, and he fled, dripping blood from his throat upon the trees, and came to Tawar Nu Fung, and dwelt there, filling it with horror. So Luthien leverages the fact that returning to Morgoth without his guise, his naked spirit form, would be a humiliation to Sauron, and that he would earn Morgoth's scorn. She was correct. And Sauron would rather yield and retreat than lose his body and be forced to go back to his master defeated. So I don't think that he saw Sauron as his little buddy. Sauron was useful to him, and the moment he becomes not so useful to him, he's not going to help him out. Okay. All right, next question was submitted anonymously. Why did Melkor want to dominate Arda? Spite. We just talked about this a little while ago. Melkor, also known as Morgoth, was a very spiteful being. Even in his youth, when he was Melkor, he was spiteful, he was jealous. He had been given special, unique insight into Eru's mind, as we see with this current passage I'm going to read from the Silmarillion. But when they were come into the void, Iluvatar said to them, "Behold your music." And he showed them a vision, giving to them sight where before there was only hearing, and they saw a new world made visible before them, and it was globed amidst the void, and it was sustained therein, but was not of it. And as they looked and wondered, this world began to unfold its history, and it seemed to them that it lived and grew. And when the Ainur had gazed for a while and were silent, Iluvatar said again, "Behold your music. This is your minstrelsy, and each of you shall find contained herein, amid the designs that I set before you, all those things which it may seem to be himself devised or added. And thou, Melkor, will discover all the secret thoughts of thy mind, and will perceive that they are but a part of the whole, and tributary to its glory." Now, what Melkor really wanted, though, was to actually be God. He didn't want to work for God. He wanted to be God. He wanted life in the timeless void, and he sought a way to create it. He sought the secret fire, the flame imperishable. But he never found it, because it's actually within Iluvatar himself. During Ainu Lindale, with the music of the Ainur, he created the very concept of evil due to putting his own thoughts and discordant themes into the music, only of course to be told that it didn't really matter. Anything he did was Eru's design. Melkor was unsatisfied with creation, and he wanted to add to it, he wanted to mar it, he wanted to tear it down, he wanted to start it over. He wanted it to be in his image. Eru Iluvatar stated after this, of course, that was part of his plan. Melkor was thoroughly unable to ruin creation in any way that matters. Morgoth, of course, took this as a challenge and just became more destructive and chaotic. So that's really where it all comes down. He's full of spite. All right, next question is from Zorua Galaxy, who asks, were any of the Valar or Maiar in the War of Wrath? If so, who? There were no Valar, certainly, though the army of the Free Peoples of Middle-earth was called the host of the Valar. They represented the powers in this conflict. We know there was one Maya. We know that Eanwa was there, the Herald of Manwa. We can assume that there were probably other Maya there. They weren't mentioned by name, but this war went on for 40 years, and it was so destructive that it destroyed Beleriand completely. A good big chunk of Middle-earth was destroyed by this war, completely gone, cracked and flooded and fallen into the sea. So some very powerful beings were throwing their weight around. So there probably was an unknown number of Maya present. The only named one was Eanwa. There may have been others. There may have been a few others, or there might have been a lot of them, but we just don't know specifically which ones or how many. We know that Eanwa was there, though. Okay, next question is from Ron Weasley, who asks, are there any details for the sea monsters that Gandalf makes reference to in The Lord of the Rings? No, there aren't any details, and I think that's kind of actually the point that Gandalf was making. So I'm going to read you a passage from The Lord of the Rings, and in this passage, Gandalf is remarking upon the idea that Glorfindel has to cast the One Ring into the Sundering Sea to be rid of it forever. Then said Glorfindel, "Let us cast it into the deeps, and so make the lies of Saruman come true, for it is clear now that even at the council that his feet were already on a crooked path. He knew that the ring was not lost forever, but wished us to think so, for he began to lust after it for himself. Yet oft in lies truth is hidden. In the sea it would be safe." "Not safe forever," said Gandalf. "There are many things in the deep waters, and seas and lands may change. And it is not our part here to take thought only for a season, or for a few lives of men, or for a passing age of this world. We should seek a final end to this menace, even if we do not hope to make one. So the point isn't about sea monsters that Gandalf knew about, or that Tolkien knew about, or whoever may have any details on, but rather the point is that the point that Gandalf is making is they don't know what's down there. There could be anything down there. There's things down there that we haven't seen. We don't know what they are. We don't know what their nature is. And also that things change. The One Ring lay on the bottom of the Anduin River for thousands of years, and it turned up. It was thought lost forever, but then there it was, in Bilbo's hand eventually. I mean, first in Deagle's hand, then in Smeagol's hand, but eventually in Bilbo's hand, and then in Frodo's hand. So these things have a way of being found. If they don't destroy it, somebody's eventually going to find it. We don't know what the nature is of whatever is down there in the very depths of the ocean, and because we don't know that, we can't be sure that it's safe to put the ring there. So Gandalf hints at there being things down there, and this may be born of knowledge, but I don't think it's born of knowledge. I think it's born out of wisdom. Because you don't know what's in the darkest depths of the ocean, you shouldn't chuck the ring there. And he also says, another thing that's very important, seas and lands may change. Numenor was raised and then fell. Beleriand fell. What's lost can be found, either by some unknown creature or just by the land being raised again. Okay, we have an anonymous question here. Did Gandalf ever show his real power on Middle-earth? So, by real power, the power, his angelic nature, going beyond the limits of Gandalf the Grey, is what I'm assuming you mean. And yes, twice it happened. And well, even beyond the limits of Gandalf the White. Twice, right? The rub is, the second time, it's more subtle, right? So the first time was his duel with Durin's Bane, the Balrog. To put it into perspective, as a wizard, Gandalf had a limiter put on his abilities, so to speak. He did not have the authority to use force against force when it came to Sauron. The Balrog in this case doesn't really have much to do with Sauron. Gandalf managed to fight it to mutual destruction. This is significant because they are essentially the same type of being, a Maiar, a lower tier of Ainu. Durin's Bane, though, didn't have any sort of limiter placed on it, so you think that a limited Gandalf versus an unlimited Balrog is not an even match. The Balrog should win that. So the fact that Gandalf was so evenly matched with the Balrog shows that he really was able to tap into his true power in this instance. It came at a cost, though. He channeled way too much energy through his staff, and it broke. And the beating that his real living, breathing body took during the battle caused it to die. It caused enough damage. So the second time was when he broke Saruman's staff. To understand this, Gandalf the White's true power is his authority. And that comes directly from Eru Ilúvatar. When Gandalf says, "Come back, Saruman," the wizard is compelled physically to do so. He cannot resist. He must comply. When he is told that his staff is broken, it breaks. It is also because Gandalf the White has spoken. When Gandalf dismisses Saruman, he cannot stay. As a matter of fact, he's forced to crawl away. So this second example is a bit more subtle, but it's also, I think, far more impressive because the complete and total domination of one Ainu over another, simply with words, is one of, I think, the greatest feats of magic seen in Middle-earth since the First Age. Okay. All right, next question is another anonymous one. What was thematically significant about Gimli being allowed to remove his blindfold in Lothlorien? So the entire sequence there is thematically significant because it shows the beginning of the mending of ways between elves and dwarves. Lothlorien is ruled by Galadriel and Celeborn, and they have extremely different attitudes towards the dwarves. To put it very bluntly, let's get right to the point. Celeborn is a racist. He displays this in The Lord of the Rings, and he also displays this in Unfinished Tales of Numenor and Middle-earth. In Unfinished Tales, we're told of a scenario where Galadriel and Celeborn separated for a bit because she wished to travel through lands that were dwarf lands, and Celeborn was not interested. He had great enmity towards dwarves. In The Lord of the Rings, he also goes on a tirade about how Gandalf basically had it coming for going through Moria. Now keep in mind, he didn't know there was a Balrog in there. Nobody actually knew that there was a Balrog in there. There were a few like Dane who knew something was in there, but they didn't know it was a Balrog. Celeborn's rant was just a bit too much, though. It's clear that he views any place that was a dwarven place, even if it's, they've been forced out of it, it's like a bad neighborhood to him. Gimli had his own prejudices against the elves, and this is due in part to the general loss of friendship between elves and dwarves, but also because his father Gloin and all of Gloin's companions, including their king Thorin Oakenshield, was detained by Thranduil. Gimli actually seems fine with Elrond and the High Elves, but he's got an issue with the Wood Elves. And although, Lorien, it's a different thing, right? They're not the Wood Elves, they're not Sindar, but they are elves in the wood. So that might be close enough for Gimli to be like, So he's, and then he's singled out. Haldir tells him, you can pass through, but the dwarf must be blindfolded. So that obviously is going to get Gimli very angry, and it's understandable why he would be angry that he's being singled out. He's already been bickering with Legolas, and now these other elves are singling him out for the high crime of being a dwarf. So he refused to be blindfolded and walk into the land as a prisoner or beggar. He tried to say, well, I'll do it if Legolas is also blindfolded. And Legolas was like, nah. So Aragorn came up with the compromise, okay, we're all going to wear blindfolds, and that's fair. So every single member of the Fellowship was blindfolded. And, Legolas didn't care for this, but he did think of it as being fair. He acquiesced. So then Galadriel hears about this nonsense, this utter tomfoolery that's happening, and she's not happy about it. She orders all the blindfolds to be taken off. She apologizes to Gimli. She has no issues with dwarves, and she thinks that this kind of treatment of Gimli or any visitor in her lands is almost criminal. It's just wrong. So Gimli came to Lorien as an enemy, in a way, but Galadriel treated him as a friend, and this is actually what really helped him. And if you notice, she had to do this. She had to play nice with Gimli. Well, she didn't have to. She chose to play nice with Gimli right in front of Celeborn, and he had to sit there and watch his wife make friends with a dwarf. And it was important because Gimli's eyes were opened in a way that they hadn't been opened before. And you can see sort of like the symbolism of a blindfold being removed, your eyes being open. And it was in Lorien where he became the best of friends with Legolas. And that was a friendship that lasted the rest of his life. And I want to go a little further about this because somebody named Chris pointed out in the comments in Quora that Celeborn's reasoning behind his racist attitude towards dwarves may have been born of the fact that he was of the house of Thingol, and Thingol, who was the king in Doriath, was murdered by dwarves. Right? They had made a necklace called the Nauglamir, and Thingol wanted one of the Silmarils to be mounted on the Nauglamir, and he hired dwarves to do this. And the dwarves were so taken by the beauty of the Nauglamir that their payment that they asked for was the Nauglamir itself, which would include a Silmaril. And he was like, no, we're not doing that. And they killed him. So that's interesting because that's the story as it's told in the Silmarillion. However, what Celeborn did not know is that the dwarves did not kill him right then and there. They were driven off, believe it or not. And this is from the book The Fall of Gondolin, which is a more detailed account of these events. They were driven off, and then they were let back in to Milion's Girdle by elves that hated Thingol and wanted him dead. So this extra context that the Fall of Gondolin gives us, it adds a lot of layers to the whole idea that Celeborn hates the dwarves because of the story that he knew of Thingol being murdered by dwarves. He doesn't know that elves were also responsible for this, that they set it up that way. And I wonder how he would feel. Do you think, and I want to know what you guys think, do you think that while Celeborn in the Fourth Age lingered for a while in Middle-earth because he was one of the last elves to leave along with Círdan, do you think he read Bilbo's work? Do you think he read The Fall of Gondolin and discovered that it wasn't merely dwarves that were responsible for Thingol's death, but also elves as well? And do you think that he apologized? I don't know about that. I don't know if he would apologize, but there we have it. Okay, next question. This one's anonymous. How many thousands of years were each age of Middle-earth? So the ages are not defined so much by years, but by events. So they're not all the same. The first age, the defining event that ended the first age was the end of the War of Wrath, the defeat of Morgoth, and his banishment from Arda. The first age lasted 590 years. The second age was actually the longest of these ages. It ended when Sauron was defeated by the last alliance of men and elves. It was 3,441 years long. The third age ended when Sauron was finally defeated. The One Ring was destroyed. Aragorn was crowned as the king of Gondor and Arnor, and finally the passing of Gandalf, Bilbo, Frodo, Galadriel, and Elrond into the West. It was said specifically that Elrond passing into the West ended the Third Age, but they also all went together. It was 3,021 years. The Fourth Age does not have a defined end. The last ship and the departure of Círdan, Celeborn, and the last living memories of the Eldar was the final chronological event of the Fourth Age that's spoken of in canon, but it was unknown what year that was, just that it happened. But it was within Aragorn's lifetime. It's unknown what event would have ended the Fourth Age, perhaps Dig or Diggeroth, but we really don't know. And there were actually two loosely defined ages before the First Age. There was the Years of the Lamps and the Years of the Trees. The Years of the Lamps ended with the creation of the two trees of Valinor, and it was actually around 33,000 years. Around 33,000 years. Time was counted differently then. Melkor was detained by the Valar in this time, and it said that his imprisonment was 3 ages long, so there were some other sort of like 3 ages going on during that time. The Years of the Trees ended when the sun was created, the sun and the moon was created, and that was about 14,000 years. So, all right, one last question, and it's another anonymous one, and this person asks, in The Lord of the Rings, what does the name Elessar mean, and why is Aragorn called Elessar? Elessar literally means elfstone, and it refers to the green gem of the same name, which Aragorn chose as his kingly name. The origins of the actual stone are slightly murky because there's sort of like 2 different legends about it, but we know that it was made in Gondolin. That we do know that. We don't know who made it. It was an unknown orc smith. Now, there's one story that Celebrimbor made it, and either because he loved Galadriel and wanted to give it to her, or because she asked him, maybe, right? That she asked him to make it for her, rather, and that it would protect Lothlorien. So the gem was said to have healing properties, or rather that whoever held the gem would have healing properties, which makes sense when you think of Aragorn as a healer. So the stone wound up in the possession of Idril, who survived the fall of Gondolin, and she passed it to her son, Eärendil. And if you know a bit about Aragorn's heritage, we know that he's descended from these elves, even though he's a man. So, now this is the legend, of course, but there is another legend, that I mentioned. Galadriel asked Celebrimbor to make her the healing gem to preserve Lorien. Either way, right? Whichever one you go with, Galadriel does wind up with the gem. Now, in one version of it, Gandalf brought the gem back from Valinor and gave it to Galadriel, and gave it to her with a sort of prophecy saying that she will pass it to the man who will be the king. So she kept it for a while, and she passed it actually to her daughter, Celebrian, and then Celebrian gave it to her daughter, Arwen, and then at some point Arwen gave it back to Galadriel. Not sure why, that's just the way it happened. And knowing his destiny, when Bilbo wrote a poem about him, Aragorn asked him to put in something about a green gem, so he did. Galadriel gave Aragorn the Elessar, and he did indeed become the king, and he named himself Aragorn the Second Elessar Telcontar meaning Strider, of the family name. So there you have it. That's all the questions that we have for this week. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Like I said, please do the whole thing. Like the video, share the video, subscribe, hit bells, do all sorts of things, right? Let people know about the channel if you know anybody that's an interested party, and I'll see you guys next week.